Hello and welcome to the Too Much Apparently podcast. If you're new here, this is a podcast for the deeply feeling, overthinking, emotionally overloaded humans who've been told they're too much apparently. And if you're back, thanks for choosing to sit with us again.
We're Alice and Carly, two therapists who are also just sensitive weirdos trying to make sense of life, healing, and our own brains. This isn't a professional advice podcast. It's more like the messy, honest conversations that happen when you finally feel safe enough to say what you're really thinking.
This space is for people like us, the ones who've been called too sensitive, too serious, too emotional, too intense, and have spent way too long believing that it's true.
Okay, on with the episode. Today we're talking about oversharing, that thing where you meet someone and suddenly you're telling them your entire life story, and then you spend the next week wondering what's wrong with you.
Oh God, yes. That vulnerability hangover feeling.
So we're unpacking oversharing, but not in the you're too much way, because I think oversharing gets completely misunderstood.
Yeah, sometimes it's just how people connect. They're naturally open, they process out loud. But for a lot of us, especially if you grew up with critical or emotionally unavailable parents, it becomes something else.
Right. It becomes a strategy, a way to control the outcome, to try to stay safe, to manage how people see you before they can judge you.
So if you ever walked away from a conversation thinking, why did I say that? If there's shame and regret attached to it, not just, oops, I'm chatty, this one's for you.
Let's get into it.
Do you think you are an oversharer?
So I think I can be, but it's not something I wholly relate to. I know a lot of people really describe themselves as being an oversharer and saying too much. I don't feel like I am an oversharer. I feel like there are things that I can share that other people may think are oversharing, but I actually still don't. Yeah.
Do you think this podcast is oversharing?
No, I don't think it's oversharing. My only hesitancy there is sometimes there's that inner conflict of, is it okay to say this much whilst being a therapist? So there's that conflict to me, but that's more about professionalism and what's ethical and that kind of thing, rather than the stuff we're talking about isn't okay to be speaking about publicly.
Yeah. I think it's a tricky balance as a therapist, isn't it? And it's definitely one of the concerns that I've had about doing this podcast is knowing that. So I let all of my clients know before the podcast launched that I was doing a podcast and let them know some of that they might feel this way about it or they might feel that way about it. It could disrupt our relationship. There is that risk and that it was their choice to decide whether to listen to it on that basis or not. Not that there was any, there's no obligation. So yeah, it does sometimes feel like, which I don't want to describe it as like which mode I'm in, because I'm not in a mode when I'm a therapist. Like I don't want any of my clients to think like, oh, she just turns this on when she's with me and turns it off when she's not. How I am is how I am. But you don't disclose as much. You don't talk about yourself as much in a therapy session because it's not about you. It's about the person that you're working with. So yeah, there is a balance. I think I would describe myself as an oversharer. I definitely would have in the past, but I think that's definitely reduced. And I think, so I've mentioned this before about somebody read something about me online and then used it in a really humiliating way.
Yeah.
That definitely changed my relationship with things. So immediately after that, I put a post on my social media and I was like, I will not be deterred. I'm proud of how I am. But the unconscious part of me, I guess, just decided it wasn't safe enough to do that. And I have withdrawn and not shared so much, which I think is sad. And for context, the thing that was taken about me was me. So someone had posted in a forum that I used to say that they were struggling with self-harming. And I shared my experience of what helped me to reduce the ways in which I was self-harming when I was younger. And they took it and changed the wording in some of it and presented it in a way that I was a risk to people, which was obviously very unpleasant.
And horrendous.
But when I think about the things that have helped me to heal over the years, so much of that has been about other people's, their own struggles, the rawness. So I've mentioned the lady who works with food and body issues now for like 3 episodes in a row. So her name's Janine Roth. And her books are so raw about her struggles with food and body image. And they were just so healing for me. I think about other kinds of experiences as well. So Elizabeth Gilbert is another one. She wrote about the breakdown of her marriage, and I read that when my marriage broke down. And Yeah, just the cringe things, the shame things, the things that we're discouraged from talking about are actually the things that have made me feel like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not a bad person. I'm just someone going through a difficult experience, and other people have been through this as well. Before that experience happened to me where I was humiliated in sharing things, actually that was really part of how I wanted to share, like, this is how it is for me. And it's been the same with my therapist and my supervisor as well. So the points where my therapist has said, like, I've really struggled with this thing, and my supervisor said, like, oh yeah, sometimes, I get really in my head about this. Oh, it just feels like such a kind of sigh of relief of like, oh, okay, maybe I don't need to try so hard. Maybe this is just how it is.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, definitely. I too have found when people have spoke very openly about personal experiences, really helpful at certain times in my life, especially when people is unpolished and it's kind of like down in the dirt with the nitty gritty
yeah,
of the experience. It's raw and it's real.
yeah,
And that is so helpful. And we need to have that out there. And I think when you asked me the question about oversharing on the podcast, for me, it's knowing that I think I know I value being really truthful, like being a truth teller. I really value honesty. And I've always valued the nitty gritty. I want to hear the nitty gritty of people's experiences. And so I also feel sometimes uncomfortable where I'm holding back on the podcast of getting into the nitty gritty of my experiences because I think that's what the world needs to have out there. But it's
mm,
also the thing that doesn't feel ethical or professional
mhm,
in the role as a therapist. But I think it's so helpful when people can. And I've also thought potentially that's just me recognizing that it doesn't have to be me that's doing that, like other people can fill that gap. But in day to day life, I do want to bring the nitty gritty and
yeah,
hear that in other people's experience as well. Like, bring on the gory details. Like, I want to know all
yeah.
of it. The things that people don't usually say or speak about are the things that often like, need to be said, need to be spoken about.
Yeah, I think it's one of the flaws of therapy as a profession that we are so restricted or feel so restricted in sharing our actual experiences
Mm.
because most of the time we've done a lot of therapy, we've done a lot of our own work. And most of the time, we're probably quite comfortable with talking about our emotions because of the amount of work that we've done. If I didn't have to worry about what is my membership body going to think about this, or my supervisor going to think about this, or what the therapist going to think about this, I just feel like I have so much to share that I feel like I can't because it doesn't feel appropriate. And then I'm like, well, why?
Sure.
Why isn't it appropriate for me to share about my human experience? And people
Hmm.
have the choice to see it or not see it. Nobody
Yes.
has to listen to this podcast. And even the social media, if somebody doesn't want to see it, they can block the account and it doesn't come up in their
Hmm.
feed.
Yeah, especially when, as you said before, there's this adage in self disclosure as therapist in terms of self disclosed scars, not open wounds. I think as long as you're not, so there's one voice in my head that says, as long as you're not processing open wounds, like raw trauma, through a public sphere, and it's about getting validation for yourself or you're doing it for a specific reason, then okay, maybe not great, but it's, yeah, why there's also like such a big worry and question mark around sharing some of those more gory details of things that are scars and from the past and that I could talk about freely, free from shame, free from needing anything from it other than, yeah, this was just my experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that, with the scars and the wounds, partly I'm like, but we just did an episode on screen time and that is a wound. That's not a scar. An active and ongoing thing that I'm working on. Yeah. And I do also have, I've kind of touched on estrangement and how that is for me. And some of that is it's not quite scar, it's an active
Sure.
process and will be an ongoing process because it impacts my whole life and how I see myself. But yeah, I just think it's important. So there's another therapist that I know that's estranged from their family. And when I was newly estranged from my mom, I listened to some podcasts that they'd spoken on about their experience, and it was very raw. It was, it was really the details of, what had happened. And I just found that so helpful. It just really helped me feel less alone. So I suppose I think there's something about the focus when it comes to self disclosure as therapists really seems to be on the risks of self disclosure and never on the benefits of self
Yeah.
disclosure. And I'm absolutely not saying that as a therapist, you should go into a therapy session and be like, oh, yeah, but this, my experience this and my experience that, and, making it about you because that isn't. It has to be in service of the client in the therapy room. It has to be in service of the client in the therapy room. And I think there's something about outside of the therapy room where it's your life and you're
Mm.
living it. Actually, yeah, maybe there is some benefit that we're missing out on by all these thousands of therapists that have done so much work and learned so much that could share more about their own experiences that would be helpful for people that are not so far along the path. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of believe that to be true. And then this blocker that I
Yeah.
guess the blocker is just fear and being told off and getting it wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like gosh, there's so much we could talk about in relation to oversharing
Hmm.
professionally at
Hmm.
work, as therapists, as a CEO, as a hairdresser, doing somebody's hair, those kinds of places. So yeah, there could kind of be this sense of oversharing professionally and then the sense of oversharing personally, where people feel like they're known for putting their foot in it, not having a filter, saying the thing that you weren't supposed to say there. And the shame that comes along with that, especially if it's impacted upon relationships or
Hmm.
your likability or how you're viewed by other people. And I'm
Yeah.
conscious that you asked me if I would class myself as an oversharer. What about you? Would you class yourself as an
Yeah.
oversharer?
So I was just thinking about different kinds of oversharing and what feels comfortable and what doesn't. So we can cut this out if you want, but what I was thinking about is when you said in the past, like about sharing about bodily functions,
Yes.
and you'll go to the toilet with the door open.
I will, yeah.
Like for me, that is like I can't do it. I cannot do it. Like when I come to your house and I go for a wee,
Yeah.
I'm still like, oh my God, I hope she can't hear. Like, why? Why do I care?
Yeah, whereas I would just stand with the door open talking to you, like, "It's
Right.
fine," and I would do it the other way around. Like,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I have and do it the other way around with some friends where we're having a conversation, I'd be like, "I just need a wee, just follow me to the toilet."
Yeah.
Carry on the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, I'm like, oh, I just like, yeah, there's something about that where I'm just like, I just can't get past it. And I think that, yeah, I just think that the thing that I had where I was humiliated really has changed me in ways that I don't want to admit.
Mm,
Like, I almost feel like I want to have an oversharer badge. I feel proud to be an oversharer. But actually, if I check out how I've been in a lot of situations more, since then. I haven't shared as much. Although I do have some experiences. I think I might have spoken about this on the podcast before as well. So I was in a group with somebody and I said, I just mentioned that my dad had died and it wasn't recent. I can't remember the context at all, but I shared about it and someone said, "Oh, that's a lot," or something like that.
oh,
And I
yeah.
don't and I don't know if they meant that's too much to share here or whether they meant that's a lot to have been through, empathy, whatever. It felt like the first one.
Totally. Mm,
Yeah, yeah. I'm familiar with that feeling, that kind of internal sense of, oh, I think I've shared too much there,
mhm.
but also a sense of confusion and frustration of like, why don't we talk about these things? Why isn't
Yeah.
it okay to share about different things that we're going through?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's certainly making me think of when I was a teenager. Perhaps I had a greater sense of oversharing there.
Mm.
And I know my memory is rubbish, but I do have a feeling and a sense of saying things and being met with like awkward silence after
Mhm.
having said the thing. And I may have conflated it, but I feel like maybe that was a relatively common experience,
Mm.
or at least it happened enough times for it to kind of, for the emotional resonance of that
Yeah.
to remain in my body. And so I think perhaps as a child, I maybe said or did things that other people thought were maybe a bit weird or an odd thing to do or say or to share. I have one memory of primary school so it was after I found out my parents were getting divorced, and I only knew one other person whose parents had got divorced, and she was a close friend. And I remember going up to her to say, "Oh, my parents are getting divorced." And I just remember her saying something like, "Oh, well, it's not a good thing," and like walking off or something. And I
Mm.
remember wanting to say like, "Oh, that's not what I meant," but she'd walked off.
Yeah.
And I know I know I felt deep shame about being misunderstood
Mm.
in that moment, and it made me feel like, "Oh, I shouldn't have shared that, or I shouldn't have just
Yeah.
told you that." But I wonder if as I've gotten older, it's not that I've shrunk that part of me, which is weird now thinking about because I feel like I shrunk so many parts of me. But maybe that part didn't. I just ended up surrounding myself with people who took that on. And
Mm.
actually, I think people find it funny that I will just say some things. I think if people laugh at me, it's usually because I've maybe said the thing that other people wouldn't say. And maybe there's a difference between I just want to say, quote unquote, overshare, and just know that from here on out, if ever I say overshare, there's air quotes around it. Um, when perhaps there's a difference between when you overshare and people see it as humorous and they like that you're the one that sometimes says the thing, versus experiences where you say the thing and you're met with silence, when you're met with disapproval,
Mm.
when you're met with an eye roll or
Mm.
a look of disdain or something like that. And
Yeah.
where then that is your experience as where rather than I guess my experience is, oh, I'm funny because I dare say these things, versus those that are left thinking, why can't I keep my mouth shut? Why did I say that? And like
Yeah.
replaying it over and over again in their mind where they feel that sense of, yeah, like flooded with embarrassment and shame for, oh my God, I can't believe I actually just said that.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like such a tricky one because it feels like those moments of like, oh, why did I share it? And then that self criticism of I shouldn't have said anything really bashes up against my overwhelming desire for people to be more emotionally open and honest about their experiences. So I do get the that self criticism of like, oh, why did I share that? But then I very quickly get to, but why? What was wrong with it? Like it was fine to say that. It's
Hmm.
just my experience. I'm aware that we're talking quite vaguely about what the oversharing thing might be. But yeah, I just wish it was different. I really just wish it was different. When I was preparing for this episode, what came up was the idea about oversharing as a trauma response, which I think
Okay.
is like over explaining. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
definitely something I've done. And I think really can come up when you're in a place of fear of judgment, of like trying to justify why you are some way or you think some way or whatever.
Yeah, I definitely over explain and that feels like a different thing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But even there, I'm like, why is that a bad thing? Why is it over explaining? Why is it not just like, I've been through this thing and I would like to be understood. I'd like to increase my chances of
Yeah.
being understood. And I know I can definitely get into patterns. So the ending of my relationship with my mum featured a lot of me over explaining in a desperate attempt to get her to understand things from my perspective. And that was not helpful and it didn't feel healthy. I still think it felt necessary though. I don't really think if I went back, I could have done anything differently.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe I just hold I was going to say an extreme position, but even there I'm like, why does it have to be extreme to just say what your experience of life is? Like why is that extreme?
Yeah. It shouldn't be extreme, I would say, but I guess it is in comparison to how the
Mhm.
world tends to work. There's a certain image that's coming up in my mind as you were talking, and what I feel like I personally want to differentiate between when we're
Mhm.
talking about, yeah, like oversharing. So I feel like there's a difference between someone saying, Oh, how's your relationship going? And then you're telling them about all these arguments or whatever that you've been having and going into great detail about all of the arguments. Versus, for example, when people say, "This is my new dress," and someone says, "Oh, I don't like it." No offense, I don't like it. And other people
Mm,
say no offense right before they say something that you could easily
offensive.
get offense
Yeah.
to. And then the people that are like, I just say things how they are, I just say it how it is. I'm thinking about those now types of people.
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
don't know that that necessarily falls under oversharing, but also I feel like there's a difference between oversharing in a way that's about maybe you trying to be misunderstood, wanting your experience to be heard,
Yeah.
wanting to be seen, versus oversharing your thoughts and opinions in a way that could be unkind or cruel.
Yeah. They're yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely different things. But and I can own for myself that I have had to learn that being honest doesn't mean that you just get a free pass to say it however with complete disregard for other people's feelings. I think
Mhm.
because I was surrounded by so much, I can't think of the word, but like hidden motives, and I feel like there must be a term for it, but like when people aren't quite saying what they mean or communicating in a way that isn't straightforward, I've then had such a drive to be as honest as possible. And sometimes that has come out in a way that hasn't showed consideration for other people in my life. So yeah, that is something that I've had to learn. But yeah, that feels very different to oversharing for me.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
think it's possible to say the thing. It's possible to say, I don't think that dress suits you, or it's not something that I would choose. And I think that sentence of, this is just how I am, is a real giveaway.
Yeah.
So yeah, now I'm trying to think in my head is like, what would I see as oversharing? I think there's some things that are like situationally appropriate and not appropriate. For
Yeah.
example, as a therapist, it's not appropriate for me to share whatever argument I've had with my husband that morning, right? Uh,
Perhaps it's some of the things that might be classed as oversharing might not be related to the thing itself, but then the context within which you are sharing it or who you are sharing it to. So, I don't know. Say you also go to the dentist and give them great detail about the argument that you had with your partner or that weird growth that you've got on your bottom or something like that.
uh,
So maybe you might say that to like a friend. Oh, I've got this weird growth. I don't know where idea's come from, by
yeah.
the way, but I'm rolling with it now. I've said it.
Okay.
Maybe you'd say to a friend, I've got this weird growth on my bottom. But yeah, you might not mention it in a restaurant when you're eating or yeah, with your dentist.
Yeah.
I guess there's no specific guidelines on what counts as sharing versus oversharing. But perhaps for us as individuals, it's when we have that vulnerability hangover
Mhm.
afterwards. That doesn't necessarily mean we've overshared, where we're suddenly feeling really exposed, where then there's the panic of, why did I say that? Or where you feel
Yeah.
like you've put your foot in it, where you then end up feeling like, oh, see, I am too much. They're not going to want to see me again.
Yeah.
And there's all those horrible feelings that you can be left with after an
Yeah.
interaction, especially
Yeah.
if the other person hasn't matched your level of sharing. I think that's another
Yeah.
thing that alters how it feels. If they've
Yeah.
matched your sharing, probably less likely to feel like you've overshared. But
Yeah.
if you talk about this traumatic thing that happened to you in childhood and the other person just goes, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds hard. Yeah, anyway, so I went to tennis the other day and I did this and I did that. And you're like,
Mm.
oh, got it wrong. Oh no.
Yeah. 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 So I think there is something really important about this goes back to the self-criticism bit. And I don't think self-criticism is helpful if you feel like you've overshared. I think what it could indicate is that you've shared with somebody that isn't a safe person for you to share with,
Yeah.
that isn't able to hold that depth of vulnerability, of openness, that it's not a you problem, it's a compatibility issue.
Yeah.
I do think that is really important.
Everyone has such different ideas. And what makes me laugh is my dad says that I ask too personal questions.
Mm,
I absolutely don't. So if I was to say, "Oh, how's your relationship going?"
Mm.
You'll think that is a really personal question to ask.
Yeah.
He's
Mhm.
actually said, "Oh, you're always asking personal questions." I'm like,
Mm.
"That's not a personal question to want to know how things are going in your relationship." And he said it a few
Mhm.
times, at which point I just say, "No, you don't. I'm just trying to connect. You don't share enough." But
Yeah.
everybody has a different comfort level also
Yeah.
about how private they are and what
Mhm.
they think is intrusive or
Mm.
too much to ask somebody. And I
Yeah.
feel like this is something that's changed a lot generationally in
Mhm.
terms of being more open and honest about things that we talk about.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, I feel like we connect everything to the bloody patriarchy every friggin' episode. But there's so much around being a woman and women's bodies. Talking about periods was like, oh, so hush, like it's a shameful
Yeah.
thing to talk about
Yeah.
in public, or
Mhm.
getting a tampon out of your bag and walking through the
Hiding
restroom
it
with
up
it
your
clearly.
sleeve.
Yeah, hiding it rather than just like walking through with it in your hand. It's like
Yeah.
nobody must see that I am a woman and my body does womanly things. So there's also so much just around bodily, I'm bringing it back to bodily functions again. Bodily functions and things like that are dirty and to be
Mm.
kept a secret and to not be
Mm.
spoken about. I mean, I don't know how many men in my life have just said, like, oh no, women don't poo. Like, where they just say, oh no, I can't think about that. Women just don't poo. I feel I've heard so many people say that. Like, where is this idea come from that
Yeah.
it's just too much for a man to think that a woman
Mhm.
poos? Like, grow up, like, get real. But of course, it's not okay to imagine. I don't know.
Mhm.
Trust me, guys, this is tame for me. Yeah. So much about the oversharing part is
Mhm.
who's deciding, because one person's oversharing is another person's. Oh my God, I can't get enough of what you're talking about right now.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, and then I just think it's more about finding your people, isn't it? Like I
Mm.
couldn't go through life just surrounded by people that don't want to share or hear me sharing. Like I don't like what's the point? I don't get it. Yeah, I just don't get it. But yeah, I was just thinking about being at my book club. And sometimes I'm like, so we read a book that was about mothers and I couldn't make the club that time because I was poorly, but they asked if I had any comments and I put in the chat like, I just wanted to know how is it for you and what's your relationship like with your mother? Like I know yeah, the book was great, but like tell me about your relationship with your mother. I want to know. Which nobody
Yes.
responded to.
So you did actually
I
ask.
did actually ask, yeah, or I just said, I
Oh.
said that's what I wanted to talk about, but yeah, nobody replied to that.
And how did that make you feel when nobody responded to
Yeah,
it?
kind of a bit sad, but also expected. I think it was fairly early-ish, or maybe not. Maybe it was this year, or I don't know. No, it was last year. I don't. Maybe sad's a bit strong, but like, I wish there was someone that wanted to tell me about their relationship with their mother because
Mm.
I love talking about relationship with mothers. I just think they're so complicated. They have such massive impact on our lives. Yeah, I'm just fascinated by it. That's what I want to know about.
Yeah.
Amongst other things. Yeah, I just want to know. I just want to know
Yes.
people. I think that's what it comes back to. It comes
Sure.
back to that depth. It comes back to like, who are you? And let's experience each other. And yeah, how are we similar and how are we different? And what are you going through? And be real with me. I'm not interested in the dance of performing being a human.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that dance. But I feel like it's hard when you put yourself out there and you dare to ask that question in the group chat or with somebody that you're with, and
Yeah.
it kind of just gets glossed over or
Yeah.
nobody really speaks about it. Yeah, it's that denying you that depth and then ultimately of that connection.
Mhm.
I guess this conversation is making me think that I don't really believe there's such a thing as oversharing. And maybe it's more about not oversharing, but appropriate sharing. That
Yeah.
there is no such thing as oversharing, but there are certain times and places when it might not be appropriate to share some things. One of the reasons that I don't fully relate to oversharing is because I think I have good control
Mhm.
over when and where and with whom I'm
Oh,
sharing
okay.
stuff. Not
Yeah.
always. As I say, sometimes I say something in that awkward silence and you're like, oh, I got it wrong. But that's not a common experience for me. Whereas I know, well, people that I know, people that I work with, where that has been a common experience where they feel they're an oversharer, but it's coming back to that lack of filter. And actually, that might have been fine to say in a different context,
Mhm.
but it's where you do it within the context that maybe
Mm.
is not the best place to have shared
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and so going back to my book club, I feel like, partly someone could say that's not an appropriate place to get into people's relationships with their mothers.
Mm,
And that's true. And also in my dream book club, we would use the books to talk about how we relate to it or don't relate to it, or yeah. So if it's a book about mothers, that we talk about our own mothers, because that's a
yeah.
path to connection, that's a path to human connection. And also I hold that it's fine, and it is fine that nobody responded to that, and I didn't want to talk about that. That's also okay. I still enjoy going to the book club and enjoy what we do talk about. So yeah, and I think that, like, the appropriate sharing, I'm still with the question of, but who decides what's appropriate? Like, there isn't a right answer, and I think sometimes you can't know until it's too late. You can't know until you said the thing, until it's too late.
Mm,
I just
yeah.
think there's really a need for compassion. I think the one thing that I would say is about, if you're in a group and you notice that you are taking up a lot of the time in the group talking about your issues. And I don't mean every now and again, but if it's like, if you meet regularly and you notice that you are using a lot of the time on a lot of the occasions that you meet, there might be something about, how is the rest of the group feeling about the time balance that every member of the group gets? It feels like there's a thing about, like an etiquette thing there about, is everybody getting enough space?
Hmm.
And because I've definitely been in spaces where people overshare in that respect, so they're sharing, but they're sharing so much that it's taking up a lot of the
Yeah.
time.
That's more about, yeah, dominating the conversation.
Yeah. Which is, again, it's not necessarily a wrong thing. It might be right for that group, but yeah, I guess there's something about just checking out, like, how is this working out for the rest of the group? There's also responsibility on the other group members to speak up,
Hmm.
to take up more space, to ask for more space in the group. Yeah. I am aware that my kind of position comes from my experiences, where I've experienced a lot of shutting down and a lot of, we don't talk about that, and a lot of deflection from personal questions and things
Mm.
like that. And I really do just wish that people were more open.
Yeah. And even if for whatever reason someone's not able to be open or if it's something that they struggle to deal with, I still think there is a way in which you could respond that doesn't shame the other person
Yeah. Yeah.
or leave that person feeling like they've done something wrong.
Yeah.
I can just so connect with the feeling that it gives you in your body. And
Yeah.
it's just a horrible feeling. It's just when you
Yeah.
want the ground to swallow you up and you just poof and disappear in that moment in
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a nice feeling. Yeah, there can just be again a lot of grief around that about the
Mm.
experiences that you have had or friendships that you've lost, whether that is genuinely because of your oversharing or because you've interpreted it as, oh, that's my fault because I'm
Yeah.
an oversharer.
Mm.
But either way, the sense of hurt and pain, loss and grief that comes along with that, it can be really painful, especially when, so if we're prone to getting into anxious attachment relationships with other people, if
Mhm.
we've experienced relational abandonment and we're worried about losing people and losing friends, again, our anxiety can manifest as such where we might overshare and then inadvertently end up like sabotaging that connection, for example.
Yeah.
And there is so much about our relational patterns that can also be
Mm.
at play here. And again, there's nothing wrong with sharing for validation, but at the same time, if we're always sharing like solely for validation, that's not necessarily always coming from a healthy place
Right.
either.
Yeah. I think there's something about it's needed in order to develop a sense of being able to rely on yourself.
Yeah,
If you're always stuck in that place of needing somebody else to validate you,
yeah,
that might be something to look at. That at some point it's helpful to be able to validate yourself. And yeah, which I guess is where the position that I have with oversharing is the way that I've come to feel more comfortable with it is that I've decided for myself that this is what feels right for me. And if it doesn't feel right for other people, that is uncomfortable for me sometimes, but it doesn't mean that I'm wrong. It doesn't mean that I'm doing
mm,
it wrong. It just means that most other people are not this way. And so I'm not going to find what I need in most people. But when I
yeah.
do find it, like with you, it's amazing. Mm.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I feel like this topic bleeds out into so many others, such as over explaining, over justifying. It also leads a little bit into being direct or abrupt, which, funnily enough,
Yeah.
is what we're going to talk about in the next episode. So there's lots of different, I think, threads that can play a part in this, especially whether you feel like your oversharing comes from, firstly, that ADHD impulsive. Yeah, if you feel like it's coming from an impulsive, unfiltered part, like what we see in some ADHD is, whether it's coming from a trauma history where you're maybe searching to be understood and validated and have your experience validated or to get certain needs met, and where you're sharing from a place that feels safe and grounded and, and empowering. You kind of said you've recognized this is how you communicate and what you like to talk about. And if people don't like that, fine. And the ones that do, yeah, you like, there is something really empowering in that. And it means you're being intentional in your sharing rather than, oh, that slipped again.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference when we're able to accept how we like to communicate, find people we can communicate in that way too, be more intentional about it where we can. But also, if you are someone that sometimes can put your foot in it a bit and oops, you've already said that thing before it's left your mouth, do you have people around you that know that that's just you and either take that on the chin or find it a bit funny or don't
Mm.
make a thing of it in
Yeah.
a way where you're not then left like drowning in the social shame?
Yeah. Yeah. That feels so important. Yeah. So if we're to think about what it should look like, I think just the presence of the should isn't helpful. I think so. What I had in my mind a moment ago was I used to write a blog online where I was writing, it was when I was first doing intuitive eating. So I was writing about my relationship with food, which inevitably meant about writing about how my life was. And it was literally just like the same as if I would have written it in a private journal. I wrote it in a blog. It was very raw. It was public. I shared it with a group of people that were also doing intuitive eating, but I had loads of positive feedback. I did
Mhm.
also have somebody anonymously leave a comment, and I think it was somebody that knew me that pretended to be somebody that didn't. It was a helpful comment, but I wish they'd done it in their own name. Yeah, it was very raw, and but it was helpful for me to do that and be met with support, and it was helpful. Other people told me it was helpful for them, for me to write about, and it was anxious, it was messy, it was probably a bit desperate at points because it went through the period where I was getting divorced, and essentially my happy ever after to my first husband had ended, and I thought I'd never believe in love again. It was, it was really sad. So I almost don't want to like get into how people should behave. I think the only should for me is try and find someone who can meet you where you are, whether that's a friend that you can trust or a sibling that you can trust or a therapist that you can trust. If there's nobody else, then I honestly think that's my only should. Don't harm
Mhm.
people. Don't intend, don't harm people. Try not to be, whether that's intentional or unintentional, like be mindful. Like your words have power and that is important. And that's not to say that being direct is wrong, because I don't think it is. I think being direct is really good in some situations. But yeah, just find someone supportive and just check out, is this going to hurt anybody? And if not, share, say the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's been so much rhetoric on social media about oversharing. And the other thing that comes up a lot in relation to oversharing is trauma dumping. I hear it from people all the time about, oh, yeah, I've not reached out or spoken to anyone because I don't want to trauma dump on anybody. I hear people using phrases like that now quite often, and it's now inbuilt a fear in people that
Yeah.
it's not okay to talk about things that they've experienced because then they're trauma dumping. And so then
Yeah.
people aren't opening up because they think that's oversharing and that's a bad thing to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And yeah, that really saddens me because I feel like there are these concepts that then get taken as hard or fast rules rather
Yeah.
than there is so much context and nuance to all of this. Yes,
Yeah.
if every time you're seeing your friend, you're just telling them about your trauma over and over again and not
Yeah.
creating any space for them or thinking about how that might impact them to keep listening to that, then of
Yeah.
course that's not going to be a good thing to do. But you're allowed
Yeah.
to talk to your friends about your trauma and it's not trauma dumping.
Yeah. And I think it also puts the onus on the traumatized person to be acting in an emotionally healthy, I don't love that, the way I'm phrasing that, but I'm just going to go with it, in an emotionally healthy way. If you're traumatized, you are going to have less capacity to think about the impact on other people. And there is a responsibility for the person who is tired of listening or doesn't have the capacity to listen to say, I really care about you and I don't have the capacity to listen to this today at all. Whatever it is that we have to say, this isn't work, that I'm not the person to share this with, to do that in a kind way. Yeah, I think trauma dumping has come out of the kind of the big boundary conversation where I think people have, what we're realizing now is that maybe we've gone a bit far on boundaries,
Yeah.
and that is having a negative impact, which I also think is fine. Sometimes we have to try something out, realize we've made a mistake. That's just part of being alive. We're going to get things wrong or realize that they haven't quite worked out in the way that we're intended. And the sooner we can say that isn't, oh, I thought that was going to work and it wasn't, the sooner that we can change course and go to something that helps us better.
Yeah.
But yeah. So if anyone's listening to any of my friends or anyone who knows me is listening to this and worried about trauma, like, come talk to me. Just come talk to me about stuff. I want to hear.
I always want to hear.
Hmm.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of our conversation today has centered on oversharing isn't a thing. It's
Yeah.
not a problem.
Yeah.
Yes, but in terms of communicating with others, there are always ways in which we can develop and grow our communication skills
Yeah.
overall
Hmm.
and how we're talking to people, how we're taking up space, how we're sharing space,
Yeah.
and having that high level of self-awareness.
Hmm.
So yeah, we can all absolutely work on and improve our communication skills. I think that's something that we should all be doing forever anyway. But the oversharing part is not the problem.
Yeah. The thing you want to talk about is fine to
Yeah.
talk about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That feels important. So if you're someone who shares a lot and then regrets it, being naturally open isn't a problem.
You're not too much, you're not broken. You're learning to pace connection in a way that feels safe.
The work isn't about shutting down. It's about learning to choose who gets access, when, and how much.
It's about building relationships where you feel seen, not exposed.
Next time, we're diving into Too Honest for My Own Good, the episode for anyone who's ever said something true and then immediately thought, shouldn't have said that.
We'll talk about why some of us just can't do the social dance of sugarcoating, why truth-telling can feel like a liability, and why the alternative, staying quiet, often feels worse.
But for now, we'll leave you with this. What would it feel like to focus on finding a safe person to share with instead of shaming yourself for sharing at all? That's all from us today. If this episode made you feel a bit less alone, the best way to help us reach more people is to subscribe, rate the podcast, and follow Too Much Apparently on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Those simple clicks help other sensitive humans find us when they need it most. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.